Welcome to At Home with Kelly and Tiffany, where we share powerful tools, exciting education, and relatable views about holistic health, physiological birth, and thriving in the female body. We're home birth midwives in sunny San Diego, passionate about the alternatives that give women control and confidence in health, in birth, and in life. We've poured a lot of love into creating very in-depth and high-value offerings, a monthly membership, a physiological birth course, and holistic guides for the women who really want to dive all the way in. But this podcast, we want to bring zero-cost information about health and natural birth and make these important topics accessible, always. Your support of the show is also zero cost and means everything to us. When you leave a review, share an episode, and join our newsletter, it really helps us keep this space open, ad-free, and full of honest, valuable conversations. Now, let's dive into today's show.
Well, we're back to podcasting, Kelly.
We are. Congratulations to us, man.
I know. This is actually really fun for me that we decided that one of the ways that we were going to be able to bring the podcast again was not record together.
Which is so sad to not look at you directly in the eyes, but infinitely easier this morning to get ready, to prepare all of like the logistical pieces in the background of like family stuff and whatever. I'm like, oh yes, sustainability is found here.
So let's update our audience real quick. I mean, we have such a great topic to get into today, but people have not heard from us. Our podcast audience has not heard from us since August. And I think that last episode, we promised them we would be back. We're taking a short break. We'll be back in September. And now it's the beginning of mid-June.
Life happens sometimes. We really didn't anticipate it becoming this, but sometimes certain things, like, and we say this all the time to clients and all of that, like sometimes in certain seasons, you do have to prioritize, right? And put some things on the back burner. We love this podcast, which is why we took some time to like really step back and kind of forecast what we wanted for it to provide the very best for all of our listeners.
Yeah. And just from a really honest place, we got overwhelmed with a couple things that were going on in our life. And the podcast is a wonderful, beautiful thing, but it is not who I am in my innermost being.
Yes, it's a fun part of what we get to do. But in all of those things that we have been doing since we last were, here and present, we were launching a course. We've been like diving into our membership. We've been on social media, all work-wise. And then we also have personal lives too, right?
So, I mean, we're in a season of life where we're prioritizing our family. And I think we've been transparent about that before to our audience in the various places, that midwifery took a huge chunk of our time and energy, and it still has a huge piece of our heart. But we have to look for ways that we can show up in this space and educate and participate in the community and bring value without running ourselves ragged or telling our families they have to sacrifice. And so that's why the podcast is coming back in the summer, because the kids are off school.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's helpful for us to make decisions like that, as much as it's like hard to lay certain things down, because again, we tell women that all the time, right? There's going to be some things that are going to need, like in certain seasons, to just say like, this is a good thing, but I have to lay that down for right now. And that's okay. We need to hear that. Like, we don't all just have to be a part of this like hustle culture that keeps you just only being as productive as possible work-wise all the time. I just don't think that is good and right for everybody, especially women, and the way that like our bodies and minds and hearts and all that function.
Yeah, absolutely. But we have been hustling in some spaces, some workspaces in our lives. And we did launch our childbirth education course at the end of August, like we said we would. And that has been a really fun thing to play around with and to welcome dozens of women into the birth course. And it's an evergreen style course, so it can be jumped into at any time. And it's been really fun over these past 9 months or so to walk with women through the process of preparing for a physiological birth.
Yeah, and hearing birth stories now that, women have been in it for a long time, some coming in their very first trimester, getting all the information. It's been so sweet to see how pieces of our education and information actually land with families, and they move forward and make decisions based on things that they're learning and confidence that they're growing in. And watching that transformation into, motherhood, it's we are really blessed to be able to do what we do. But the course especially has been sweet because we get to provide midwifery care, basically like midwifery education for so many more women that we could in person.
Yep. It's an exciting place to be, and just it's wild to me just how much we can do on the internet these days, and what a place of community and connection that can be for lots of women, and including us, even coming from a place where we resisted that for a while, and just being able to be there, be fully present in that space. So even though we let the podcast go for a little bit, we have been active on Instagram. That's kind of our little home, our little corner, where it's really easy for us to show up there and show up consistently. And so when I told everybody that we were bringing the podcast back at an actual specific day and time, we got so many messages, and I polled our audience on topics that we should present on and discuss, and women were just overwhelmingly asking for more birth stories. So we have lots of really fun stuff in store for you guys in this season of the podcast launching, which is so exciting for us to plan on that. But a lot of birth stories coming too, which I just want women to be able to look forward to that, since it's in such high demand.
Yeah, I mean, I love sharing birth stories, whether it's on Instagram or on here. That's been a special part of this podcast in particular, to be able to go back, not only just share the amazing things that happen at births, but pieces of clinical insight as well. And then also just our general takeaways of how sweet it is that we get to do this pretty amazing work, where we get to witness such incredible experiences that families have that are just life-changing for all of them. So it's cool to be able to share that too. I'm excited that people were excited, because I think that we both felt ooh, we love this part. We love sharing about this. So it's cool that it landed well with people too.
Yeah. And I mean, we've talked about this before, but the podcast interaction with the listeners is just so, there's not a way to get direct feedback all the time. And so sometimes we think we're talking to nobody, and then we're not talking to nobody. There's people who want to hear what we have to say about some of these topics. And so that's always an encouragement. And one of the ways that you guys can encourage us in that space in particular is by leaving a review, or you're simply just rating the podcast is one way that you can say, I'm listening, I love it, keep it going, because we're human. We need those pieces of encouragement too.
That's my love language, words of affirmation. So please provide me my love language, okay?
I demand it. I demand you provide me the love the way that I would like to receive it.
Yep.
Okay, so it was exciting for me to kind of do a couple of outline reformations for our podcast. When you're starting something new, you get to just look at what's working, what's not. How do I want to make this better? How do I want to make this more fun? And I'm a little bit nervous that us doing recordings in two different spaces is going to take something away from the conversation. And I know that's not a true, I know it's not it's not something that is it's not a real legitimate possibility. We're still going to have wonderful conversations, but I am going to miss sitting right next to you while we do that. So for now, we'll see. I don't know. Everything's always changing. For now, we're trying out this icebreaker thing, Kelly. So you and I connecting in a conversational way before we provide the value that we promise. Maybe this
value
is just us.
It's upcoming. The value, just wait for it.
Maybe we just wanted to hang out and record it and see what kind of weirdo would watch us talking about random things.
Yep. Oh, great. It's great.
Okay, so my question for you, Kelly, what is something that you've bought on Amazon lately that has changed your life-changing Amazon purchase? And the reason I thought of this is because I have one, but I want to hear yours first.
I have two currently. I'm sure there are more. A lot of stuff I end up getting on Amazon recently has been like, I don't want to go to the store for that. And I'm like, how lazy am I actually right now? Okay, so two things. One, and this is actually pulled from people from Instagram. I got a percolator for coffee making and I love it. I don't know why it took me so long to get away from a coffee machine. We use that every morning, right? It had plastic in it. I was like, I'm just apparently not going to think about it. And finally was like, actually need to do something about this. And the coffee is so much better. I love plain black coffee and it is just delicious every single time. Smooth, bold, perfection. So a $20 purchase and life-changing, which is a beautiful thing. But I also have to mention, I got a weeding tool where I don't have to bend down and pull weeds. You stick all these little forks kind of in on this long stick and press a button and it pulls the weed up for you. And then you just throw the weed away. It's so great because our yard has so many weeds and that's one of my least favorite things, but also the most satisfying. This covers every ounce of everything I would have wanted in a weeding help support because my back doesn't hurt, my hands aren't terrible, and it feels really satisfying. So, sorry, I have two.
That's amazing. Well, the percolator's just fun, and you've shared pictures of it before on Instagram. Plus, I've seen it at your house, and it's just cute.
It's a nice little addition to the kitchen, sitting on the stove.
Yeah, you don't mind having it out. It's adorable. But the weed pulling thing, man, where we moved to last year, I guess that's another life update. Moving, buying a house, moving, even though it was just a couple towns over, was that was so much. Plus, it was during the holidays. So if we thought we were bringing the podcast back around that time, was absolutely no way. But where we moved is very heavily forested, so we don't have a weed problem because it has its own ecological thing going on, which is the hugest difference between the yard at my previous house and the one that we're living at now. But the weed situation at that house, I could have used. I mean, we were just constantly buying things to manage the weeds. And our neighbors were like, you should just spray those. And my husband was like, my wife would kill me.
We will all die and not from the chemicals in the Roundup. My wife will be doing it.
No. Yeah. She would live that. He just laughed at the neighbor that suggested that. You don't know Tiffany very well yet. But the weed, so the weed thing I'm really interested in, that's going to change somebody's life. I could see why you'd say change your life. We'll put these things in the show notes so people can follow along who.
Yeah, and I didn't do it justice. I didn't explain it very well, but I promise you when you click on it, you're going to be like, this is, if you have weeds anywhere in your home or in your yard, not in your home, but your home's yard, you will want it. It's honestly life-changing.
Fork thing that you press a button and the weed comes out. Yep.
Fork thing on a stick.
Just in case I ever get a weed.
Fork thing on a stick.
Okay. My thing, this is funny to me that I care so much about this, but I just, every time I see it in my house, I'm like, you are the best little thing in the whole world. And it is so simple. It's ridiculous. A part of my laundry rhythm is not drying everything. It's mostly my stuff that I end up not drying. So when I do a load, all my kids are doing their own laundry now. That was the thing that we did this past year. Everyone's in charge of their own laundry. So that means I'm only in charge of my laundry. So when I'm doing loads of laundry, it's mostly my clothes. And half of everything needs to be hung up to dry. And I have one of those pop-up racks that you just, it's like an accordion. It compresses, you put it somewhere, and then you pop it up. And at our new house, I have this little laundry room. We used to do laundry in our garage where we just had an infinite amount of space to have something pop up for a day or two. But now I have this little laundry room, and I love the laundry room idea. But when we pop this thing up, it blocks, it takes up all the space in the laundry room to have my things dried. So I knew there was a solution for it. And I found it's like exactly the same thing, but it mounts to the wall. And so you have this laundry dryer rack hangy thing that it lays flat on the wall. And then when you need it, you pop it up, and it has all these places to hang your wet clothes. And it's not taking up space on the floor, and it's collapsed on my wall, so it's not ugly when I'm not using it. And it's the simplest thing, and it has absolutely changed my life.
Don't you think on simple things like this where you're like, it must have been like another mom who was like, what can I do about this problem I'm having? Who's just like, I'm going to make this thing, right? Like some of these solutions, I'm like, of course, this is so brilliant. So stinking simple. But like, actually, like you're saying, it's like actually life-changing because it really does solve a real issue. It's not like some superfluous thing that you're like, that sounds nice. This is actually like a real issue. I like it.
Yeah, so I'll link that in the show notes. And then in an effort to transition us into the topic that we're actually promising to discuss today, I will also post a link to our labor tool list on Amazon. So we have a list on Amazon that has all the great labor tools. We've seen everything under the sun. Half of it's crap. We only put the good stuff on our list. So if you're looking for packing your birth bag, packing your birth basket, getting some tools together for labor, we've got some vetted ones for you. I'll put that in the show notes too.
I love it. There is some crap out there. You are correct.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about getting your partner on board with home birth.
Big old topic. There's like a million different ways that we could talk about this too. Yeah.
It is so huge. Every time we bring it up on Instagram, it becomes this like giant, enormous, really detailed, nuanced topic because it's really common. It's really common for women to be ready for a home birth, ready to make that decision, and they bring that idea to their partners, and their partners shut it down for whatever reason, or maybe don't shut it down, but they feel so uncomfortable that the woman doesn't even feel like she can have that desire anymore because her husband's so uncomfortable. So we're going to unpack some of those pieces today because there's a lot of women who are looking for information and strategies and approaches to getting on the same page. And I guess this doesn't have to necessarily be all about getting your husband on board for home birth. It can be, and I'm using that term kind of loosely, right? Getting your husband on board. It's really aligning your parenting decision in pregnancy in preparation for how you're going to raise this baby together. Yes. And home birth is one of those potential things that can come up, but we're going to be specific about it, but you can apply this to getting your partner on board for a natural birth, getting your partner on board for hiring a doula, getting your partner on board for questioning something about pediatric care once your baby's around. Like there's going to be plenty of things that you and your partner don't see eye to eye on. And we're going to give you some tools for kind of sorting that out together today.
Yeah. And I think a piece of that too is women just generally, probably because it happens to us specifically in our bodies, we do way more of the research usually up front, right? So we're coming from a place usually of education and awareness, and we're like soaking in all of the Instagram feeds and the blog posts and the research and all of that. And our dear sweet husbands are just chugging along, right? Like, I'm gonna have a baby. This is awesome. I'm super excited, or I'm stressed out about, pieces of that or whatever, but they're not necessarily doing the same research too. So I feel like a lot of times men are not coming from a place of like, I don't trust you and your research, or I'm not on board with this, but just like wait, what? I have never heard of such a thing because my algorithm is very different than yours, right?
I love that you brought up that point because I think that there's multiple ways and multiple pieces, and there's no like formula for how to make your partner agree with your ideas. And I think one of the things we want to stress today especially is looking at his needs and his concerns as him as an individual, right? And it's not about this right or wrong decision. It's about figuring out together how to hear one another's perspectives and communicate well and respect each other's process and boundaries and all of that. So it's a unique process for everybody, but there are some universals to it. There are some things the last time we discussed this on Instagram, I saved about probably 30 different responses from women who were chiming in about their particular story, their journey with their husbands not being okay with home birth, and then what was it that made them okay with home birth. And I think I'll record these somewhere because the power of testimonial in somebody else's story and the way that they word it is so much more valuable sometimes than just hearing midwives talk about why home birth is so great and why partners should be on board with it. So I might put that into like a blog post or something that we'll include in the show notes if I'm able to pull that together before the show airs. But there were some themes that were just overarching across everyone's experiences. So we have dozens and dozens of women saying a couple of the very same things. And
Just it's cool to be on the other side to witness that kind of growth as well in a man who just wants to make the right decision for his family to protect them in the way that he sees like best. And sometimes, again, that comes from a place of education or not, right? And so being able to meet someone where they are and like respect that, honor that, work with that is important.
yeah, totally. So I think where we end up starting out is women, they just go through the decision so much faster. They're so invested. They're so emotionally tied to the pregnancy and the experience that they consume a lot of information at once that leads them to the decision, this is the best thing for us. This is the best thing for me. This is the best thing for my baby. And I think that the place where men are at is that they don't feel comfortable with it, mostly because there's a piece of it that they don't understand. They have assumptions about the options. They're afraid. And so I think those are the two opposing pieces, that women are really emotionally invested, do a ton of research, are able to make a decision moving forward that feels really good for them. And we kind of leave our guys behind in that process. They're kind of left in the dust. And then they're kind of feeling like, we can't be making decisions that are irresponsible, that are unsafe, that are not going to work for our budget. Men have a lot of valid concerns and valid objections. And there's a little bit of controversy about this, I think, just because we all experience a different level of communication in our marriage and intimacy and respecting each other's decisions and stuff. But at the heart of it, the woman just wants, and it doesn't matter exactly what it is that she is, what her plan is, what her goal is. It doesn't just have to be home birth, but at the core of women in this particular situation, I believe she just wants him to trust her with this choice.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And how like validating for all of that research, all of that work for somebody to say like, I don't fully understand it, but I trust you in all of this work, in all of this like desire that you have, like show me, right? Like I'm open to hearing more, or I'm willing to say, yeah, I don't fully understand it, but like I'm for you. And this sounds like this is for you also.
Yeah, and I think that that is the correct response for men, giving all of the variables. I think women can come respectfully to their partners and say, this is really important to me. This is what I want. And the best response that's honest is if he's unsure, he can say, well, I trust you, and I want to be at the place where you're at. So let's figure out like how we're going to get there together.
Mhm.
We talked a little bit about like just looking at men's roles in relationships and in the family. And it's different. It's different than what women's roles are. I mean, we're just biologically different. We're hormonally different. We're set up to want and need different things. And men are the protectors and the providers. And we need to acknowledge and see them in those spaces so that we know where they're coming from with their concerns and their fears.
And it's no wonder that men's like the most common question we get from men in consultation is about safety and it's about finances. And it makes sense, right? They are the protectors and they are the providers. And I don't fault them for like that just being sort of on like this rotation of being like, I expect to be asked this by a dad. I expect that to be asked by anybody, but it's if a dad is with, his wife in a consultation, we almost can confirm before it even happens that those are two questions that will be asked, which I love because I'm like, yes, you should be concerned about those things because that's part of a huge part of your role for your wife, for your whole family. And then we get to have this conversation about not necessarily like trying to say, oh no, this is what you should do, but just here's the information and do with it, digest that how you would like to. But it absolutely makes sense that they want to do something and make a decision that makes his wife feel safe, child feel safe. But safety can look, different or have a different meaning, I guess, or understanding to different people also.
Yeah, and so I think that's the key. That's the common ground. So if women can make peace with, oh, he's the protector, he's the provider. That is just the baseline that he's coming from and not be on the defense with that, but then also for men to understand that their job in that is not necessarily to make everything okay all the time, right? Because we know that in birth, sometimes that's not possible. And we should do an episode on that, is men managing the idea of wanting to fix things in labor and how can you be present in that space knowing you can't do it for her, you can't fix it. But the dad's role is to make the mother feel safe. And he will agree with that. And she will agree with that. And that is the common ground. She needs him to trust her and she needs him to make her feel safe. And if you have things going on in your relationship, in your marriage that are already rocking that trust and safety factor, this is probably going to be a really difficult thing to try to navigate together, right? Because there's so many foundational pieces there. So with his role of making her feel safe, really it's just about them agreeing together on what that means. What does that actually mean? My job is to make you feel safe. Well, how are you going to feel? How do you feel safe? And then she gets to say, I'm going to feel the safest when I'm attended at home with a low risk care provider in, the safety of our space, with you by my side, with someone who respects physiological birth, with right. And she can say, this is what makes me feel safe. And if she's also able to articulate the other options, the other birth settings, the other alternatives to home birth, that does not make me feel safe. So by you insisting that I have our baby there, you're sorry, there's probably a nice way to say this. You're not doing your job of making me feel safe. You're insisting on your way so that you feel comfortable with what's going to happen to my body. So I think that's where it can get kind of controversial, is because some women are like, how dare you? Men don't get to have the say, but they do. They do. They're one of the parents. They're your partner. They do get to have say. So you guys have to decide together, man and woman, how are you going to agree on what it looks like for him to make you feel safe?
Yeah, and like we've kind of touched on before, a huge part of that is going to be like understanding, right? Understanding what that safety actually means. Not only just clinical safety, but like emotional safety, right? As well. And just kind of like highlighting and helping him see what all those different kind of options actually look like and being like, hey, I've been over here researching, watching videos, going down all kinds of rabbit holes to figure out what's going to be right for me. And I want to bring you into that. Like, let's do some of this together rather than necessarily you just sending him an email with, 50 links, but saying like, hey, come sit next to me. Let's look at this. Let's read this together. Let's watch this together, to be able to loop him in. Because sometimes, I mean, this is true in a lot of different places, not just we're deciding where to have your baby, but if you don't fully understand something, you're probably going to be less likely and less willing to make a big old life decision based on it, right? And so being able to be humble enough to say, let's do this together, like come with me to do this, I think can be a really helpful piece of all of this too.
Yeah, and embarking on it together. So maybe she arrived to this decision really quickly or on her own, and maybe there's already this established idea inside of the relationship where her making that decision is perfectly fine. He's like, oh, thank God you did the research already. I don't have time for that. You seem really passionate about this. Let's do it. Or I'm not 100% on board, but I trust you. And it seems like you've done a lot of research. This is happening to your body. So let's go for it. And I'm going to catch up. But no matter where you're at, when you're at this crossroad of he's not totally cool with this, then you guys need to come together and come together as much as possible. That means getting him totally caught up on research in a way that his brain can understand. He might not be the kind of guy, most men are not, who are going to do research by watching birth videos on YouTube. That might not solidify the information gathering that he needs in order to feel comfortable with this decision. He might need a lot of statistics. He might need a lot of concrete facts and information. He might need to be going to your prenatal appointments with you, no matter who your provider is. That's something that you guys should be doing together as often as is possible. And then together, you need to be engaging in some kind of formal education too, especially as first-time moms, but also as somebody who's planning a physiological birth for the first time. You guys need to be on board with the same information, and you need good physiological childbirth education so that you're not getting education that you have to filter yourself and try to sort out yourself. How does this translate into a home birth setting, or how does this translate into a physiological birth setting, and that you guys are doing that together. Now, it's okay if he doesn't want to participate in every little piece of it, right? But if he is not comfortable with your birth vision, then he does. He needs to get on board. He needs to experience all the pieces with you so that it's not you continuing to move forward with these ideas and plans without him. That's going to just create even more of a separation.
Yeah, it'll be like you're making a decision at him, right? But you're not catching up with me. You're not on the same page as me. Like, I'm doing this out of spite, or I want to move forward with this out of spite, right? And that's obviously not what we want as we enter into this like incredible time of transition as you guys becoming parents, whether it's your first baby or your fifth, right? Like adding a new person into your family. But I think it always comes back to everything, every episode that we've ever talked about anything with partners always comes back to communication, right? It always comes back to being open and honest and being able to say, like, this is really important to me, and here's how I'm feeling right now about where you're at. You may need to like write it down in a letter or something too, if you're like struggling to really get some of those words out. But to be able to say, hey, I understand. If you're somebody who like just kind of stumbled on the idea that the fact that people still have babies at home, this all may be new information. You're like, I understand, right? Like, I didn't know all of this before. I would have thought the same exact thing. Potentially you are very blessed and you have known you've wanted a home birth for a very long time, well before pregnancy. That's important to communicate to your partner well before you get pregnant then. So you guys had lots of time to talk about that. But in the midst of making this decision, you are pregnant, this is what you would like, being able to feel validated in his own experience and concerns will go really far, rather than to just say, no, that's not a big deal. No, that's not. Don't worry about it, right? To be able to say, like, dude, I get it. I understand that this feels scary. I understand that, like, it feels like a lot of responsibility on us. I get that because it is. And let's like talk about what that responsibility looks like. And let's talk about the responsibility of parenting together and how big that is as well.
Yeah. And I think a part of that communication is deciding, and maybe this is the first time that you guys have to come to a place where you're like, oh, we disagree on something, but deciding who gets to make the decision, right? I mean, who is it, a 50-50 decision? Is it, everyone has to agree in order for us to make this decision? Is it I get 60% of the vote and you get 40% of the vote? Is it completely the woman's decision because it's happening to her body? I mean, so then you guys have to decide, how are we going to be okay if you're not 100% at the end of this? And a lot of women on Instagram told us that they moved forward with the plan of midwifery care and home birth before their partners were 100% on board. So you do not have to get to a place where before you even get to your first prenatal appointment, you are making that decision right now. And if you are not on board, then I guess we're not doing that. And the conversation's shut down. And I guess it's just not happening. This is the conversation that might take a long time to unwind, depending on the dad's history and his own birth and the stories of birth that have been around him, people around him telling him about birth, just our own societal views on birth and how that leaches into everything. That's like a really important place to find yourself, that the average American is going to look at home birth and go, oh, that's weird. That's kind of crazy. And so if he hasn't had any other influence to be thinking even outside of the medical system in his life, that's a lot. That's a really big leap. Most people can't do that in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 conversations, right? We need to allow that communication to start and then pick up and be added to as we go. This isn't something that is potentially a one conversation decision.
Yeah, I mean, we've had clients, right, who dad comes in and it's not like they're sitting in judgment, folding their arms, being like, show me that this is a good decision, but who just are there and are asking a million questions. And we're like, this is great. I mean, this is her prenatal, right? And we got to ask her some questions and all of that. But like, how great for her to see her husband sit there and be like, I don't really get this, but I think you guys can explain some of this to me that I'm not fully getting from the blog posts and the videos and all of that kind of stuff. And those end up being some of the biggest advocates at the end of the day, which I like love watching that in particular. The people who are like, oh, after experiencing it, seeing the reality of it, my eyes are kind of open to that, and how this, like, yes, I should have trusted from the beginning, but I didn't really know, right? And so it's a sweet, sweet thing to witness.
Yeah, I'm thinking of this one client in particular where I guess only the mom came to the consultation, and she said that her husband was totally on board, had no questions, and she was there just representing them both, gathering more information. Then later she said she went home and talked to him, and they decided this was like a great idea. We want to have a home birth. Let's schedule our first prenatal. And so he came to the first prenatal, and in that first prenatal, I think we had, I don't know if I was there, if it was you, but I remember the story really well, that at some point, and maybe it's toward the middle or the end of the appointment, the dad's like, wait, I'm sorry, are we having a home birth?
I was 100% there for that one. And I'm not kidding. I did my very best to like rearrange my face so that it wasn't doing the thing that I knew it would want to do. And I was like, whoa, what is happening? Where was the breakdown? Was this not communicated? Was it communicated but not fully received? So we kind of had to like backtrack and be like, oh, yeah, so that's what we're here for. That's what we're working towards now. Let's talk about that. His mind was kind of blown, but then he was like, moved right along. I was like, fascinating.
Pretty quick turnaround. But
Yeah,
even she was like, yes, of course. What do you think we're doing here? But then I'm like, well, yeah, I don't know. Anyways, that started off.
Yeah, like the reality really set in for him of like, oh, we're really doing this. And he was so fun to witness at the birth itself too. So excited. It's funny.
Yep. He came around real quick. Okay, so as any time that you're communicating with your partner, we've already addressed that this is an emotional thing for women, okay? Not only do we have pregnancy hormones on board, we have the emotional experience at the heart of what we're planning and what we're trying to do. And that is not a problem. It is okay to be emotionally invested in what is about to happen in the life of your family, as actually one of the assets of being a woman is being able to consider this experience holistically. However, I just am speaking from experience here. I'm sure I'm not the only one. Places that I feel really passionate about that my husband is not at the same not with me on it yet, it's really easy for me to take that emotion and use it to manipulate him or use it to just use it in a way that's not helpful. And so a couple of notes, just a couple reminders, ladies, that if you're anything like me and tempted to actually argue and get into a fight about this, probably not the space that you want to be coming from. We want to make space for a lot of conversation about this. So it's okay if you start to talk about it, it gets too emotional, and then you decide to take a break from it. You want to be open, you want to be honest. It's okay to like have honesty in the conversation and say where it is that you're really coming from that's driving you into this decision, because that's going to leave space for him to be really open about where he's coming from. And I know it's one of those things that like maybe we don't want to say anything too delicate. Maybe we don't want to hurt their feelings. Maybe we want to try to keep it a really smooth conversation that only has positive things so that he comes around faster and sees it as just, oh, it's no big deal, right? Like, yeah, we'll just, I just want you to get you on board with this idea. We don't want that to be a part of this type of conversation. We want everyone to have a chance to really say where they're coming from, because if we try to move this along too quickly and he says yes, but he's resentful of feeling forced or manipulated and saying yes, it will come out later. It will absolutely get dealt with later in the pregnancy, later in the birth, later in the postpartum time, maybe 10 years later when you're trying to raise your family together. And so we don't want to force our partners into agreeing with what we want just for the sake of getting what we want. So practicing and going in and being mindful about being non-judgmental, respectful, maybe rehearsing some of the things that you want to say. Some women do really well in tough conversations. It seems like kind of formal because it's a weird thing to do in a really intimate relationship. But if you're feeling emotional about it, write down the points that you want to cover, or write an email or a text message or a letter or something so that you can articulate all the things that you want to say. That's an okay way to communicate too, and then talk about it later. So there's lots of strategies in order to come at the communication piece respectfully, open, wanting to express yourself without without overwhelming the conversation.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that there's no way we could put together like a 10 steps to get your partner on board with having home birth, right? Because there are no like firm steps here, right? Because your marriage is unique, your partner is unique. Like there just can't be a true formula. But thankfully, there are some things I think that we can recommend, that we can that we have seen women walk through, that I have personally walked through in my own relationship in kind of this journey. In particular, if your spouse is really into data, right? It is like, well, you go to the hospital because that's what everybody does and look at like the outcomes and whatever, right? You can pull up and actually research together some of those stats of whatever. It's the different settings that you're choosing, the different outcomes, all different types of outcomes too, types of birth, types of satisfaction in birth, all of that. I will say what got my husband the most kind of like fired up and interested in protecting me and our children in this was, and this was made a long, long time ago now, but was a documentary called The Business of Being Born. I saw it and I was like, oh, you might be interested in this. I never knew any of this at the time. And I showed it to him and he got really fired up about like, what are we doing? And what is my role in like making sure that doesn't happen to you, right? And that was the first sort of like opening of him showing any interest because it flagged that protector piece in him. So I always plug that when talking about it, just because I've seen it kind of transform not just my husband, but many other men in that kind of place of their role of protector of their wives, of their kids.
Yeah, there's dozens of stories that came through. That's funny for me because, I mean, we were watching this movie 15 years ago, right? And we were like, whoa, this is big. It's still transforming lives.
It's
Ricky
incredible.
Lake is still relevant. It's a documentary. For those of you who are not familiar, it is a documentary that goes through the reality of what hospitals have set up a birth to be and the challenges in that setting and with that care style and care model. And it really breaks it down in a super reasonable way and talks to lots of experts and parents and stuff like that, and really presents a case for an out-of-hospital birth experience in a really relatable, practical, reasonable way. And so we got lots of messages last time we talked about getting partners on board for home birth because women were like, well, I just showed him business of being born. And then he was like, okay, let's do it. Another resource is evidence-based birth. That is just a research platform where they synthesize and review and summarize research that is done on birth topics. And they do a really good job of presenting an unbiased perspective. And so you can see pretty easily, you can take the emotional pieces out of it, and you can see really easily when it comes to birth, most women do better when they are given more autonomy, more control, less intervention. And him seeing those statistics and seeing it presented in a really unbiased way that's been packaged together already, but also provides lots of references and places to do even more research. It's a really credible source, and a lot of families have said that that's a resource that their husband had his mind changed about home birth on.
Yeah, I also think it's super helpful just to like talk to other families, because sometimes it's like, oh, I don't know anybody who's done that, right? So being able to connect with somebody who has had a home birth, particularly the dads, because as much as women are like, I loved my home birth, or like I really love recommending home birth to other women, dads who have experienced home birth are often some of the biggest advocates. And so connecting your spouse with another dad who has experienced it, it's one of my favorite things to listen to my husband talk to other men about. Like, just because he's like, dude, you have no idea. You don't have to go anywhere. You sleep in your own bed. You eat your own food. Like, you are the one who's like, I am here for my wife. Nobody else that like I don't know is doing anything. I don't know what they're doing, And so it's super sweet to see that like men in particular, I don't know, it just reminds you like it is both of your experiences, right? And so it's cool to witness dads come through that on the other side and be like, bro, like this is like the best kept secret. Come on, guys. Try to get do this as well. I promise, like it's great for these other kind of like random reasons as well, like the food and the sleep and all of that. But all of that impacts, right, their experience of birth as well.
Yeah, and it's valid. Like he's motivated by different things. He cares about different things. Of course, he wants you to have a great experience. He wants you to feel safe. He wants everyone to be okay, but also like the dad who has ever had a hospital birth experience first, who then experiences home birth. That happens in our practice a lot. They have their second baby at home, and the dad is just like, I cannot believe my midwives are about to leave and I'm going to fall asleep in my own bed.
This is the best.
It's the pull-out couch. It's the hospital, the armchair that converts into the worst sleeping surface that was ever invented.
I do not miss those when I was a doula. Ugh.
Okay, another really important thing is meeting with midwives. And we used to say in the beginning of our practice, if you're unsure about home birth, go meet with midwives. You can talk to them about what midwifery care is like and get information from them. And we don't share that recommendation anymore because we think if you're going to go meet with a midwife, you should not be asking them to convince you to have a home birth. You should already be in that space. There's lots of ways to research about home birth and midwifery care and all of that before you go meet with a midwife. So I'm not saying that you should bring dad along to have a midwife convince him that home birth is good too, because that's not anyone's job. There's nobody needs to be convincing anybody or dragging them along or changing their mind. Nobody needs to be responsible for that, right? But bringing him to actually meet the real live people who are legitimate professional care providers, experts in low-risk maternal care, will change a lot about his assumptions about what home birth can be. Men are usually really surprised that we don't fit a stereotypical midwifery profile. And some midwives do. That's okay. That might be what's available in your community. You might have this really stereotypical midwife who's going to provide wonderful care and it's all going to be great. But there's a lot of different types of midwives and different ways that they run a medical practice on their own. And so seeing some of the inner workings of that, meeting these women, seeing their personalities, but more specifically getting to ask them questions. We hear from dads all the time that was the thing for them. They really just thought the whole midwifery thing was really wacky and weird. But once they went and met with some of them and were able to ask their questions, and the midwife was able to respond thoughtfully and professionally and thoroughly and be able to say, oh, you're worried about that? Okay, well, here's what we have control over in this situation, and here's what we don't. Here's what we would do if something like that came up. Here's the probability of that happening with your wife and her risk factors and the type of pregnancy that she's going to have. Here's how we prevent some of those things from happening. If that happens or some other worst case scenario, this is what we would do. And this is how this would look. This is a situation in which this happened to me before. This emergency came up. Here's how I responded. Here's how everything ended up for that family. And just being able to hear that articulated, especially if he goes to these consults and interviews with you and he gets to hear that 2 or 3 different times. Most midwives are going to kind of say and educate in almost the same way, especially inside the same community. That, I think, is huge.
Yes, that can be absolutely life-changing. As you were talking about that, I was like, why, and we've talked about this before, but like the fact that so many families go in and ask midwives these questions, I'm like, this is so great. Now go in and ask an OB all of these similar questions. How do you handle, all of these things, right? I think while many of them, at least what last time I polled on Instagram, many people were like, I couldn't get a consultation with an OB. I just had to go in and see them. And if I didn't like them, then I had to switch care providers or something, right? But being able to do something like that, right, where you're like kind of just researching into different models of care to be like, well, this is how midwives handle these things. This is how they view these things. This is kind of their like framework for viewing us as a family, my wife, my baby. But then what about these other, models of care? What about the obstetrical model of care? What does that look like? What kind of care do we get? What happens for our baby? How are we viewed? All of those kinds of things. How are things handled? It may start to illuminate some things of like, oh, I thought, because this is all I've ever really heard, that this particular thing was what was right for us. Again, because I just wasn't really aware. But now we're starting flip siding to realize, oh, do I need to be convinced to have my baby in this low risk pregnancy, this low risk birth in a high risk setting? Like, or do we now have to, kind of flip the switch to say, instead of trying to tell me why I need a home birth, like tell me why I actually need to go to the hospital, right? Why do I need to go to a high risk setting for this low risk experience, right? And so that does kind of help shift some men's viewpoints and, just awareness when we start to just look at, yes, what you were saying, all of the things that midwives provide and what they do versus what does that look like in another care setting and which one am I aligning with for the safety and satisfaction for my partner and our baby, right?
Yeah, I think one of the benefits of how men's minds work is being really practical and looking at trying to solve a problem from the like most practical perspective. And so if you have him look, here's the midwifery model of care, here's the medical model of care, here's the experience we're trying to have together. Where do you think that would where do you think problem solving, man, that would be, where are we going to have the best of that, the best odds in that scenario, and let him explore that a little bit, give that a little bit of time, and also realize that even though his top concerns end up coming out as safety, end up coming out as financial concern, really there are some places inside of this decision-making and communication process where something really simple might come out. Like, well, if we're at home, then that puts more responsibility on me. What if the baby comes before the midwife gets there? Or am I supposed to be your entire support system? If we go to the hospital, then we get to look to the doctors and the nurse and the staff, and they just have an orderly way of dealing with things. So does that mean if we don't have all those resources that it's going to get put on me? Or am I going to have to clean up this mess? You can't do it. You just had a baby. You're going to be resting. Am I going to have to clean this whole thing up? Or is the midwife going to take my place? Obviously, she knows so much more about birth and probably has some nice things to say to you and can be such a comfort to you. Does that mean that there's no place for me? I mean, so sometimes it really does come down to these things that are totally valid, but don't seem like that big of deal, because then we have a chance to address it and go like, no, the midwife's going to clean up the mess and it's not that big of a mess. Or like, no one's going to replace you. Your role's really important, but do you need support? Let's talk about how to get you some support. Or, like there's ways to address it that doesn't have to be this huge, big thing of like, I'm afraid everybody's going to die. Sometimes it just comes back to the guy going, how do we keep this? How do we hold this thing together? It seems like this is all on my shoulders. How am I going to hold this whole thing together?
Absolutely. And which are all like valid things, especially again for how men's brains work. Sometimes they might not even realize it either. They might not realize some of those underlying things until some of these conversations come out. And so again, we always go back to that communication piece, being willing to have some of these open, honest conversations.
Yep. So I hope that encourages ladies who are listening to this today. I hope that they have some tools and some ideas that they can bring back into the space of trying to work through this with their particular partner. Of course, I have to plug our childbirth education course because we have lots of resources for dads. We have several modules that we made speaking just to dads about their role and how to prepare and support their woman in birth. And it just absolutely matters. It matters that they're included. It matters that their thoughts are validated. It matters that you guys use this opportunity in order to come closer together, to build more trust, to get better at communicating, to figure out how to solve difficult problems together, because it's only preparing you for being such a united front in marriage and relationship and parenting. And so even if it's feeling really sticky and hard, it is absolutely worth breaking down and working through it, ladies. And so I hope it's a message of hope.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm honestly just so thankful to be back talking about stuff like this. As we were having this conversation, I was like, oh, this just feels right, man. This just feels good to talk about things that actually matter in the lives of women and women's health and all of that, to be able to give some perspective from women who have either walked through it personally and walked through it so many times professionally, watching this all play out. And so hopefully, again, this is a piece of encouragement for you all as you're listening. And we're just, again, excited to be back with you for the season.
We'll catch you guys in the next episode.
Hey ladies, if you're loving the show and want to help us keep it ad-free so we can keep talking about all things birth and women's health without cutting to an ad about electrolytes or grass-fed beef sticks, here is how you can support us. First, leave us a quick review or a rating. It helps more women, new moms, and birth enthusiasts find our show, and it honestly means so much to us to be reminded that you love what we are doing here. Second, share this episode with a friend, with a doula buddy, or anyone who is on their own holistic health or natural birth journey. And third, hop on our newsletter list. This is where we share bonus goodies, behind-the-scenes stuff, fun little extras you just won't hear on the show. You can find that link to join in our show notes below. Thanks so much for being part of this growing, empowered community. We could not do it without you.